I am super excited to paint this Black-Eyed Susan as part of my vintage flower series. We are going to also learn some techniques today. We're going to be doing some layering in here on the yellow flower with the shadows and some masking fluid for the backlit look. We're going to start with those petals though. This azo is very intense, so you can add quite a bit of water to it and it'll still be pretty intense. See? You have to add really a lot to get a pale yellow. In fact, I think I'm going to add just a little bit more. And I'm just going to paint all of these this color. If you want to paint realistically, it helps to use different nuances of color. For example, the shadows on this side, reflecting from the leaves, are greenish, but up here, the double layer is a little bit more orangey. And if you're a beginner, you don't have to do that. You can just pick a shadow color and learn from it. But I'm going to show it this way because nature is so fun and it's pretty exciting to have all the nuances. Now I want to start at a back petal here. Otherwise I'll put the layers on it. And there's some of this gamboge in most of these. Dipping my brush, touching it to the sponge. It's a little bit brighter there than I want it, so I'm going to lift some, but then I'm also going to check my colors because sometimes you think things are brighter, but they're really not because you're looking at them against a white background, but they're showing up against a darker background. So let's see. That's pretty accurate. Okay, we have our second layer on, and we're going to go into the third layer. I do need to get these layers onto here a little bit. The third layer is green, and it's not a bright green. It's kind of a drabish. My green that I'm going to use is some rust, some gamboge, and some sap green. You need it to be very watered down for the layering part. The shadows can be darker. I'm going to be brave and go straight into this really prominent petal. And it's got quite a bit of green, so we're going to get these fine lines in with this brush. There's two prominent lines, and then get it wetter and just have the green come down. It's really quite dark of a petal, so we'll get some of the rest and get some more dark down in here. This brush is a Da Vinci quill, and it just helps with softening things. And these really pointy brushes, they're great for the fine lines, but they aren't as good at softening. Now before I move on, I'm going to check again with this because I have a feeling that's not dark enough. Yeah, look, see, I wanted to make it pretty, and so I didn't get nearly as much of that less pretty green. And we're going to make a darker shade. Well, it might be looking too dark to you. It almost always does to me when I start doing something like this. But then when you notice that it's against black on the painting, I mean on the photo, and in here it's against white. I think that got it though. Let's see. It's still not quite as dark. That part's not too bad, but I'm going to move on. It immediately goes into some green. And this shadow, which I've lost my drawing a little bit, is fairly sharp a green. And then wet the brush and let this all blend together. A little bit too wet, so lift some of that. And the danger with lifting is that you then lose your darks if you get too much water on it, which is a little bit of what's happened, I believe. All right, let's check that one out. It's not too far off. Now I'm going to go over this whole thing with this little brush, just damp, and just soften all of this together because it got such sharp edges. I'm just running it over it. I don't want to spread a lot of paint, so I'm not going to go over it a lot. The next thing I'm going to do is put the black in the middle. Now it looks really, really black, but I'm sure that it's actually got some brown in it. So I'm going to mix some Payne's Gray with some rust so that it's quite dark but not black. And if it isn't dark enough, we can add more black to it. more black down in this part. Okay, this is a older and inexpensive brush, and I'm gonna get it some good soap in there first, because even though it's older and less expensive, I don't really want to throw it away. So the first thing I'm gonna get is this petal here. Being very careful along the yellow. If you're doing a very large painting and want to use Frisket, I recommend cleaning your brush and getting new soap on it after a little while. And then I'm going to move to this pen for the rest. Now I'm just drawing a line first because I don't want there to be gaps in that. Up here. It's pretty thick. The next things I'm going to do are the leaves and stem. And I'm putting some yellows where it's warranted, but quickly going into the sap green, the permanent green pale. Wipe off my brush, let those colors float together. And get this darker area in here while it's still damp so it spreads a little bit. And then the leaf goes way dark up here. It's in the shadows, it barely shows. See how this is the dampness, the paper's not really wet, but it is damp. And so these colors are blending together. I'm going to start on the background, the wet on wet, and I'm just going to start in these places where it's a little small area. And then I'll switch brushes to a wetter brush, getting into some of the brighter green. I want it to have that dropped in look, you know, that soft wet on wet look. But into these areas we need some detail. And so what I'll do is I'll just soften this edge and let it blend out. Right at this middle petal, there's a darker section. And now we're getting into some yellow. This beautiful spot here. Still has some greens, but definitely it's much more yellow than the flower. And it right away drifts into some of this very dark area. So the top of the flower is more crisp looking. This gets quite dark here. And then it turns bluer and bluer as it goes across. And then down in here, it has some of this green glow. And so we're going to go back into this lighter green. Up in this part, there's a lovely lighter blue spot. We're going to see if we can get this all to flow together. And then this gets darker again as it goes down here. But I want to get this moving over here. And get this edge fuzzy between these two colors. So now I'm getting my brush pretty clean. And I'm actually going to switch brushes because this kind of brush is just better. This is a quill, Casadineo quill, and it holds water and it's just good for blending. We're going to use one of these erasers for taking off the frisket. And everything will change. These other fuzzies, we're just going to run the brush over them a little bit and let the color from around them diminish them just a bit so that they're not stark white. There's just water on my brush. Let's take the tape off. And I'm probably going to do a little bit of tweaking, but the only thing I want to still show you is this little softening of edges. And right along this petal, it's quite a bit softer. So I'm just getting it damp. My brush is not wet, it's damp. And this part here is quite blurred in. If you don't do this, then things look kind of cut out. You can also do lifting at this point if you want to. I got a little bit of green coming into my petals, so I'm going to lift that off. And then up here, where it's against that blue, it's very sharp. Just going to run the brush along the edge, trying not to overlap past the edge very much, and then immediately get it with a tissue. That's all, folks, today for this Black-Eyed Susan. If you liked this video, like it and share it and send me a note and tell me how it goes for you. Happy painting.